When this drama first popped into TikTok, I really did not want to comment, not because I didn't have an opinion about it, but because there were many other big creators that were already talking about the same issues that I saw. When I first saw that Haunting Adeline was getting a film adaptation, my first thought was, of course it is. I had already mentally filed this book at the back of my mind as, at best, a less than mediocre book that uses violence as shock value, and at worst, a literary slop that dresses up violence and rape as romance and calls it dark. I genuinely thought that I already knew what kind of conversation we would be having, the one that we've had for the past 3 years, but then I actually did my research and it's so much worse than I ever expected. And it turns out that I was wrong, not because the book is better than I thought, which, trust me, it is not, but I was wrong because the situation around the film and around the book getting a film adaptation is so much worse than I ever imagined, for reasons that no one talks about. So today we are not just talking about a controversial book getting a movie deal. Today we're talking about what happens when the person who created said book actually gets handed a microphone, decides to defend the movie deal, but in doing so actually says something incredibly dangerous. Let's get into it. Hello, my coaches, viewers, and readers. Welcome back, and welcome if you're new. If you've been anywhere near booktok, bookstagram, and booktube for the last 2 weeks, you know exactly what we are going to be talking about today, and it's the announcement that Haunting Adeline by H.D. Carlton is officially being adapted into a film, and the absolute chaos around these news. For the past 2 weeks, I've seen everything and anything under the sun. TikTok has not been this active in a long while. I've seen petitions for the film, petitions against it, rage-filled TikToks, defensive TikToks, but now we have a direct response from H.D. Carlton herself, the author of the book. And honestly, you guys do not understand what this woman has said in this TikTok and why exactly this matters, because there is so much to cover here. And honestly, her response is nothing but horrifying. Before we get into the juice of this conversation, I want to be upfront with all of you guys. I have not read Haunting Adeline because I do not read books with these specific trigger warnings. And on principle, I would rather be honest with you because I'm not going to pretend that I have read this book just for the sake of this video. But just as a quick and dirty summary about this book, just so you get a little bit of context, Haunting Adeline is a dark romance about the main character called Adeline and her quickly developing relationship with Zaid, who is a violent, obsessive stalker who is obsessed with her for some reason. The book leans very hard into extremity. We see stalking, obsessive behaviors, non-consensual violence, but all repackaged as romantic tension. And surprisingly, this book became a booktok phenomenon, and now it's being made into a movie. The criticism against the movie adaptation has been very loud, and a lot of it has been very valid, because a lot of people are upset that a story that is built around stalking and sexual violence not only is getting a massive budget, but also an even bigger platform. Personally, I think all of this is fair and valid. At the end of the day, they are giving criticism, but I didn't think I had a say in this matter because I haven't read the book until I saw H.D. Carlton's response on TikTok about this scandal. The shade. She was so shady, man, and honestly, that set me off. In this video alone, she is not only shaming anyone who has any sort of criticisms against her book or her fandom, but also she is very casually using complex concepts in psychology in order to defend her book or defend the trigger warnings when she has no idea what she's talking about. And also she is framing all these criticisms and all these concerns as censorship. And first of all, any of these topics or any of these issues is already wild enough. But using all these three in these, like in just one video, that was a wild ride. And honestly, there's so much I could be talking about in here. So let's get into it. And just fair warning, I will not be gentle here because she has me fucking fuming. Here is the thing about this whole entire situation. The book being flawed is now entirely besides the point. Because what I see here, what I see in this drama is a pattern. The response from the author and also the very passive-aggressive defending TikToks from the fandom reveals something much more disturbing than the fact that this book has bad writing. What all of this reveals is a willingness from the author and also from the fandom to weaponize real trauma, real survivors, and real psychology in service of defending a piece of fiction from actual valid criticism. HD Carlton said 3 things in this video that I want to break down. First off is the way critics are shamed and delegitimized. The second is the misuse of psychological terms as a way to shut down these criticisms. And third, the way she is dishonestly framing "we don't want this book as a film" as censorship. Starting with part 1, which is the shaming of anyone who dares to criticize this book. Let's be honest here for a second. My issue here with all this scandal isn't the fact that dark romance exists as a genre. In fact, I will go as far as to say that there are many great stories that lean into toxic characters, into morally gray stories, but also that lean into even disturbing topics. That is not the issue that I have with this book. And also, this book is not unique for having all of these disturbing topics. In fact, this book is not that special within the romance genre. My issue here with all this drama is how the fandom and now the author are responding to this criticism at all. Because when people raise concerns about a book that romanticizes sexual assault and stalking being adapted into a movie, the response from the fandom hasn't been engagement, it's been downright hostility. A large chunk of this fandom has a fervent, almost devotional relationship with Zaid, who is a character whose main personality is stalking, being obsessive, and also being extremely sexually violent towards the woman that he is supposed to be in love with. And this is translated into the fandom as well. All these people who are into this category also have an obsessive, fervent relationship with Zaid, who is the abuser and the rapist, and also have this intense desire to protect him from any criticisms whatsoever, even though he is fictional. And here is the part that should stop you in your tracks. So there's 2 things here. Many of the loudest defenders of this book not only are extremely attracted to Zaid and also have openly stated that they would love to be in the position of Adeline, the victim of the story, but also many of these defenders have also said to many survivors of rape and sexual assault and domestic violence that their concerns do not matter here. Many of these defenders are even saying that flagging this book as dangerous or as potentially triggering or even as romanticizing the same exact dynamics that these survivors actually endured is the problem, not the actual book. That is insane. If we actually let that sink in for a second, these people are telling survivors who have gone through these things and even worse, they are telling them that their feelings do not matter, that they need to separate fiction from reality, and also that their concerns are not valid. And all of this is not fandom passion. This is you invalidating people's trauma just so you can defend a fictional villain. Going into the second topic that I saw in HD Carlton's response, the second topic is using the language of trauma in order to shut down criticism. And here is where it gets really personal for me. Like, this shit actually pissed me the fuck off. In her response to the backlash, the author, like everyone else in the fandom, leaned very heavily into the use of the language of trauma and also really complex psychological terms and concepts, and framed anyone who had any sort of criticism about the book and the film as if we were condemning survivors for how they decide or how they cope with whatever happened to them. And in fact, this language has been so overused in this fandom that it has been considered, or this book has been considered as a great tool for survivors of domestic violence and sexual trauma and sexual abuse, as something that has helped them heal their own traumas. what the fuck is that? Like, are you fucking joking? I need everyone here to pay attention right now. And I need to say this as clearly as I can. As someone who has a degree in clinical psychology and who has worked in mental health, this is not how coping mechanisms work. You are just winging all of this with no clear idea of what coping mechanisms are. Coping mechanisms are not automatically healthy just because someone uses them in order to survive something horrific. That's the entire point of coping mechanisms. They are not wellness tools, they are survival tools. That's the point of a coping mechanism. The brain is astonishingly good at finding ways to deal with things that are unbearable. And in fact, there are some coping mechanisms that are healthy. We call them adaptive coping mechanisms. Like, for example, going for a walk when you are stressed, or taking care of your body, going for a shower after a hard day at work, or feeding yourself. Those are healthy coping mechanisms. But the vast majority of the coping mechanisms that we see within the mental health department are extremely unhealthy, to the point of these coping mechanisms actually being the things that put your life in real danger. Let me give you an example, because you guys are being dense on purpose. So when I was at uni, I had to do quite a lot of hours in order to get my degree. And one of the places where I was an intern at was a mental facility. And there was this girl who was like 15, 16 years old, and her coping mechanism for the horrid things that she survived was self-harm. But this self-harm was so intense and was so horrid that she, in multiple occasions, tried to actually sever her own fingers. She actually tried to chop her fingers off with scissors, with knives, with anything she had. That is also a coping mechanism, and that is definitely not healthy. But for some reason, you guys don't understand, or you guys don't get to see how far coping mechanisms are. You reading a fiction book about someone raping a girl, that's not a coping mechanism. That's just you wanting to read that fiction book. And also, if you guys want to actually use all these psychological terms that you guys have learned in therapy, let's actually name the thing that you guys are doing here. Because you reading all these dark romance books, that's not a coping mechanism. What you guys are doing is rumination. That is what it's called. As someone who actually has a degree in psychology, if you, as a survivor of sexual violence, are constantly reading and interacting with the stories that not only are considered dark romance, but also have really visible and horrid descriptions about sexual violence, about domestic violence, or even any sort of sexual assault, what you are doing here is ruminate about your own personal experience with sexual violence. You are not using all these stories or all these books as a way of healing. What you are doing is repeating the same feelings that you had when you experienced those horrid memories that you have. You are ruminating, and that is making you actually worse. If we actually want to get clinical here, what you guys are doing is a form of self-harm. You are not taking all these dark romance and very violent stories and actually going through your own healing process. What you are doing is either normalizing all these experiences and all the horrid experiences that you had to deal with as a survivor, or what you are doing is just constantly repeating this pattern and this cycle of all the hatred that you experience, or all the trauma that you experience with these situations. What you are doing is making yourself worse, because at the end of the day, if you are actually trying to go through this trauma and trying to go through the healing process, this process is actually structured. It's not you going onto Barnes and Nobles or going to Waterstones and actually going onto the dark romance area and just pick and choose whatever book you want. That is not how therapy works. And finally, last but not least, the third topic is using or framing criticisms as censorship. That is the stupidest thing that I have heard in this conversation, because us or other people having valid criticisms over your book or your movie deal or your fandom, that is not censorship. That is just criticism. The official definition of censorship is a government or institution using its power to legally prevent something from being created, published, or distributed. What's happening here is the complete opposite of that. You had the freedom to publish this book, you had the freedom to get the movie deal or the luck to have this movie deal, and also your fandom also has the freedom to discuss this book. The criticisms that you guys are getting is not censorship. What it is freedom of speech. The only thing that is happening here is that you are butthurt that people are criticizing you. And what is even worse is that framing all this organized criticism as censorship is actually having the opposite effect. Not only it makes you look like a victim when in reality you're not, you're just experiencing freedom of speech, but also at the same time you are delegitimizing all the valid criticisms that people are giving you, but also all the criticisms that people who are survivors of sexual violence and also domestic violence are giving you. The same people that you swore to protect. And look, you can defend your art all you want. And in fact, I will defend your right to defend your art because that is your freedom of speech. But you framing everyone else's freedom of speech just because they are critiquing you and mark it as censorship is not only stupid but also hypocritical. As a quick conclusion, I don't need you to agree with me about Haunting Adeline. If you love it, if it works for you, that's great for me to hear. I love that for you. But I need all of us to be way more careful with the way we talk about trauma, about coping, about survival, especially in public and in front of millions. And especially when it is used as a way to shut down any criticism instead of actually supporting the people who are surviving those experiences. At the end of the day, coping mechanisms deserve to be understood accurately and not be weaponized to win any internet battles. And also criticism should be welcomed and enjoyed rather than actually being framed as a censorship. That's all for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching and thank you for staying until the end. If you like this video, please make sure that you like and subscribe to my channel, and also you can follow me on my other social media platforms. I post that every day and I post a lot more content there, so just feel free to follow me there as well. And before you go, I would love to actually ask you your opinion about Haunting Adeline, if you have read the book, or about the whole situation. I am very curious about what you guys think, and I know that you guys will not disappoint me. So yeah, let me know what you think of the book or the whole TikTok scandal, and let's discuss and let's be nosy. I would love that for us. But yeah, again, that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you guys next week. Bye, guys.